to 10,000 feet, which is kind of my nature, and you just see Satan at work. What does he do? What does he do? What does the Bible say? Well, he steals, he kills, and he destroys. So, but there's that whisper. It's like, you're in trouble. Hey, don't worry about it. No one will know this and that. So again, there is the worm on the hook is freedom. It's release, release from whatever pressures, whether it's financial or life or shame, publicly. So that's the worm on the hook. But the hook is the trauma and the condemnation and the distancing from God, which is what he needs. He steals, he kills, and he destroys. But you think about my story and what you're saying there and with the work we're doing. What does God do? He's the opposite of that. So he doesn't steal, he gives. He creates life. He resurrects the dead. He brings healing to the damaged. So the only thing I'd say to people, and I know you would too, and anybody who's watching who has been through this or is even considering, it's just like, just be aware of there's a game, there's a great war going on, and you're the ultimate prize, who are watching. Satan is after you. He wants you to be captured. He wants you to distance you from God. And God's impulse is never but good for you. He just wants to rescue, restore, heal, resurrect, bring life into you. This is he is a force of life like nothing we've ever seen. So I'm going to move it.
Yeah, that's why there's ministries like Rachel's Vineyard that help people who've been hurt by abortion, whether directly or indirectly, and that's for women or men. So I think if there's anyone who is hurting after an abortion, get in touch with one of these organisations, because ultimately you're grieving. For people who've been through an abortion, you've lost someone and you're grieving for that. And it's a really important process to acknowledge their life, to acknowledge your motherhood or your fatherhood. And sometimes it's helpful to have a bit of guidance in doing that, which is what these organisations can provide. And it is so important to find that place of peace again after you've been through something like an abortion.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the more recent story, which is why I had you on. You were arrested twice at an abortion clinic. And kind of give us the thumbnail sketch. You've been doing this for 20 years. And I'm trying to think. I wrote down. I was asking you.
So it was an abortion centre we used to go to, and that closed down at the end of 2019, praise God. So we went to this new abortion centre in Kings Norton in Birmingham, run by BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. And this was a 40 Days for Life campaign that we were running there. So for 40 consecutive days, we'd have people there for 12 hours a day. Usually just groups of 2 or 3, so we wouldn't have a big group of people, nothing that would sort of intimidate anyone. We didn't actually have any posters. It would just be 2 people quietly saying their prayers with some leaflets of help. But some of the locals really took umbrage to this. They were ideologically opposed to what we were doing. Maybe some of them were hurting after abortions as well, and that could have affected the way that they were behaving. But some of them were behaving, very aggressively towards us. So, we were regularly, screamed at and sworn at and spat at and physically assaulted and had our property stolen. And, cars would drive down to the street towards us at high speed and just veer off at the last second, just trying to scare us off. So there was a lot of aggression. And eventually the locals managed to get this what's called a PSPO. It's a public space protection order, and it creates like a buffer zone around the abortion centre. And it's brought in by like a local council and a local police force working together, rather than something that comes from sort of higher up in the government. And they create these zones where certain behaviour is banned, and so they banned protesting in that zone. But I always maintained that I'd never protested outside abortion centres anyway. I was there.
You're not carrying a sign.
So
you're not carrying a placard or a sign, correct?
Exactly. No. That's the sort of thing that you might associate with. And I'm not saying I think that people shouldn't be allowed to protest outside abortion centres, but that wasn't what we were doing.
That's not your game. Yeah.
And so when this buffer zone came into place last September, I decided to continue going inside the buffer zone, but I would just silently pray there. And actually, I was just going at that time when it was closed. The abortion centre was closed, and I was just going to silently pray near the abortion centre.
Yeah.
And this is when the police came out to arrest me.
And what did they say to you?
So they asked me what I was doing, and I said, look, physically, I'm just standing here. And they said, are you praying? And I said, well, I might be silently praying in my head, but nothing out loud. And that was all it took for them to say, right, well, we're arresting you.
They just outlawed prayer. Local Birmingham ordinance just disallowed prayer in public spaces.
Yeah. So they searched me on the street, took me to the police station, locked me in a cell for a few hours, and then questioned me under caution, wanting to know what I'd been praying about, the thoughts that were in my head. And eventually I was charged and had to go to court. And I was completely acquitted in court. I was actually alongside a priest, Father Sean Goff, who was also being charged. He had a bumper sticker on his car which read "Unborn Lives Matter," and that was parked inside the buffer zone. And so they said he'd also broken the buffer zone because he had a bumper sticker on his car. He was completely acquitted as well, within a matter of minutes.
I just want to make sure in certain public spaces, there's no free speech. There's no bumper stickers that the police don't like, and there's no praying. So this is kind of an anti-constitutional zone. These ordinances were set up for, drunken behavior, whatever. If there's rowdy spots, they can kind of lock them down. Mm-hmm. And of course, so then activists and the police are using this. We see this so often. It's mission drift, call it, with laws. So the law is intended for one thing, they use it for something else. Mm-hmm. And so you go to court, and what does the judge do? He says, you're out, go back out. What happens then?
I went outside the abortion centre again, like probably about 2 weeks later, just after I'd been acquitted, and I stood in exactly the same spot doing exactly the same thing. Well, when I say doing, I wasn't doing anything. I was simply just standing there, thinking in my head.
Yeah.
And this time they sent 6 police officers with a police van and told me that my prayers were an offence. And when I said that I disagreed, I didn't think that prayer was offensive. He just became more emphatic, the police officer who was arresting, and said they are an offence. Yeah. And again, took me away in the police van to the police station.
Okay. Then you make it to the court.
Well, that time I was just put on bail for 3 months. And then after a further 3 months, they dropped the charges. So I didn't go to court. Yeah. They didn't press any charges. But again, almost like the process.
Just to make a point.
The process becomes a punishment, really.
Say it again, please.
The process becomes the punishment.
Yes, absolutely.
They know that most people don't want to go through that of 3 months on bail, of 6 months of investigation, not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, and they can't stand on the higher laws of the land. They know. So it's all about intimidation. And so if you just punish the person, and you can punish them legally and with costs and time, and so you're doing politics, but corrupting the law to do it, because they know the judge is going to throw you out. So these guys are really off base. It'd be really fun to find out who the chief constable is there from who the politicians and the chief constables.
Yeah, it's very sad, and it's quite clear that certainly a lot of the police do seem to be politically driven rather than wanting to just enforce the law. Yeah. They seem to have their own ideology which is influencing their behaviour. I mean, even before this PSPO came in, some of our volunteers were physically assaulted. We catch some of these incidents on camera. When I take them to the police officer said to me, well, if you don't want to be assaulted, you don't have to come out of your house, do you? And the fact that a police officer can think it's acceptable to say something like that, it shows the problems that we've got with the police force.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they're agents of one side of the political spectrum instead of just impassive or passively enforcing the laws, and with blind justice. And talk about some of the things you guys have endured. What happens to you with some of the more radical pro-abortionists?
We've often had our property stolen by some of the locals. They will come and, as I say, they're swearing at us, they'll spit at us, and I know quite a few of them have been through abortion themselves. They've come and told us that. They've told us they're glad they had abortions. Yeah. And I think it's almost a way of maybe justifying what they've been through, because they're in a place of denial at the moment.
Yes.
And that
they
can kind
feel,
of come out
many people feel the judgment and they think it's coming from you. Where it's
that's the sad thing.
Yeah.
And it's the irony is they're sometimes saying this to people who have themselves been through abortions.
Yes.
Many of my volunteers have been through abortions. And that's the last thing in the world they'd be doing is judging anyone else.
No, we're all sinners. We're all wicked.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of healing needed in that neighborhood. But also I think it is important to kind of remember that, considering there's thousands of abortions done on that street corner every year, that is kind of infecting the area with spiritual evil.
Yes, of course.
So it's not surprising that people are behaving in an aggressive way, in an irrational way. If there's literally demons living on that street, and I'm not talking about any people, that abortion center attracts evil.
Spiritually,
spiritual evil, so and the irony is that the other end of the street there's a church. So it's almost like we've got these in those old Western films where you'd have two people coming down the street to meet each other and they both have their hands next to them. It's a bit like that. It's like the line's now being drawn, and literally a line has now been drawn with this buffer zone, which is part way down the street. And there's the church at one end, then there's a line, and then there's the abortion center. And there is literally a battle going on. If we could only see it, if we could only really realize the war that there is on that street and in all of our towns.
And for me, again, let's draw back and make sure this message is really clear at the 10,000 foot level, because what's happening here is the police are completely on you. It's not constitutional, we would say, in the United States. And the judge is releasing you, but they'll keep doing their work to arrest you and harass you. And they're doing this because you're silently praying. And yet the pro-abortion protesters are physical, spitting, violent, and doing all kinds of things. And the police won't do anything where there's a clear violation of the law. So again, they're not agents of the law. This is they're political agents. It's pretty gross.
And the crazy thing is, the 40 Days for Life volunteers that I have, they've actually been praying outside the buffer zone. So they're outside the church on the pavement, barely even in sight of the abortion center, and yet still they are being attacked, physically. Like I say, they're being sworn at, having their property stolen, even though they're not even outside the abortion center, or like I say, barely can even see it from where they're standing. And I think the problem is when you bring in these things like buffer zones, it ends up empowering those people who oppose us. They think they're above the law. They think they can behave however they want. And to be honest, they're right. They can. They seem to get away with behaving however they want because the police don't want to do anything. And it just increases the division in those neighborhoods. The intolerance that's been fostered by these buffer zones.
They operate with impunity. Obviously, they can do whatever they want. The police are saying, you can do whatever you want, wink, wink. So then
that's essentially what happens. And the division now, people have come out to us from the houses and just quietly said to us, I want you to know I support what you do, but I don't dare to lift my head above the parapet because I'm worried about what my neighbors might think.
So there's the effect of all that. That's the whole point. You better keep your head down. This is what's going on in the West. We were, as I said, we were talking before the talk and just getting to know each other. So, the big lesson for me is, look, as in the West, as Christians in religious freedom, we're the frog in the kettle. So what's being done to Isabel is the game plan. So you're going to harass, you're going to use the courts. So you're going to use politics that are really clearly not constitutional and activate the local police force or whatever to act in an unconstitutional manner. And so if Christians want to go along with that, so be it. But we better wake up, because what I notice is look, I've done this for 20 some years. And now what I'm doing, and this, is not abortion. It's persecution overseas. It's religious freedom and dealing with every dictator and despot and strongman and or radical Hindu, Marxist, etc. And it's all the same game. Hey, by the way, in our country, we have religious freedom, they'll say, and it's usually on the books. We have religious freedom in our country. Now, what that means is, please, whatever you do, do not come into the public square with your faith. So even you, this is the worst. It's like, it's not even protesting or speaking. You have no megaphone. You're silently praying. You can't even pray in public. Well, that's so, again, United States terms, so unconstitutional. It's so against, the tenets of religious freedom. And you think about, in the United States, religious freedom is such a core of our rights. And why is it? Because, all those victims of persecution came and they realized the importance. And religious freedom means you have freedom of association. You can gather as you like. You have freedom of conscience. You have freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech. And so all those things have to be shut down for some special interest group. And so this is what's happening. So what the dictator and despot is doing overseas, this is what opponents are doing here. And so Christians just need to wake up. And I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, it's all been brought in off the back of a lot of lies that have been shared, saying that we harass and intimidate women,
yes.
All the abuse that we,
yes.
That we dish out and things. But there's already laws to deal with harassment, to deal with intimidation. If any of that was happening, then there'd already be laws that could make sure it was sorted out.
That's right.
There's never been anyone charged outside abortion centres with harassment or with intimidation, because it doesn't happen. Because those people who are offering help and praying there, they aren't people who want to behave in an intimidating fashion or anything. So I think this is exactly the issue. They realise that they couldn't get rid of them because of harassment or intimidation.
Yes,
so they've tried to bring in new laws to say, well, just praying there is now a crime. Well, that won't wash. And I think they do need to realise that while Christians are peaceful, we're not doormats.
Yes.
And it's not even our own rights that we're sticking up for here. We're sticking up for the rights of preborn children, and also for the rights of women to know what alternatives are available, to know the risks that they're going for, which is what we're there for. So if we're silent or we're silenced, then the children have no voice, and those women and men using abortion centres won't know about any alternatives. So it's for those people that it is important that we have our voice.
Yeah, and freedoms are always taken away through the promise of security, or through the threat of civil disorder. We can protect you. This is a very dangerous situation. All we need to do is remove rights. That's never it. It's, you go after perpetrators. And if people are violent on either side of abortion clinics, they should be arrested and dealt with.
Absolutely, yeah.
Whatever side you're on, doesn't matter. But political discourse and protesting obviously should be allowed. I think we've laid out just what's been going on and just how dangerous this practice is, and it's very in vogue in the West. So, any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I guess two things particularly come to mind. One is the importance of prayer. The fact that there are forces trying to ban prayer. I'm not necessarily talking about police forces. We know ultimately that Satan wants prayer banned, and it's maybe a reminder to us of the importance of prayer. Sometimes, we can get caught up in doing things, which is important too. We do need to be people of action, but prayer has huge value. So I think it is maybe a reminder of how important that issue is. But I think when we're looking at such a kind of depressing issue as this can be, the issue of abortion itself is such a sad issue. And then when you couple that with the buffer zones that are coming in, it could be easy to get very despondent about it. But I think as Christians, it's so important that we stay people of hope. I mean, I remember hearing a lovely story once of, are you familiar with Maximilian Kolbe, who was a priest who was killed at Auschwitz? So a lot of people know quite a well-known story about Maximilian Kolbe, that there was another man who was sentenced to death, and Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward and said, would he be accepted instead of this man, because this other man was a family man.
Yeah.
And so Maximilian Kolbe was starved and then finally given a lethal injection. And that's the story that a lot of people know about Maximilian Kolbe, which is an incredible story. But there's another story which I think is equally inspiring about him, and that the story is at Auschwitz as well. And it's told by another man who was at Auschwitz, another prisoner there. And this man says, you know, when you get to the gates of Auschwitz, he said, it's like your hope dies. You know, you can see the misery on the faces of the people inside. And he said, you know, I just knew, he said, I was never going to get out alive. And he said he just got, you know, as you can imagine, so depressed, so low being in Auschwitz. And he said there was one day when he was walking between the blocks where the men were housed. And he said, you know, his head was hung low, he was feeling really miserable. And towards him walked Maximilian Kolbe. And as if reading what was going on inside him, Maximilian Kolbe walked up to him, put his hand on his shoulder and just said, hope, never give up on hope. And he said that started a fire inside him. And he went back to the blocks where he was housed with the other men. And together they hatched a plan to break into the officers' mess, to steal their uniforms and dress up in them. They stealed the keys to the commandant's car. They got into the car and they drove out of the gates of Auschwitz. And it was one of the most daring and successful escapes in the history of Auschwitz. And you can just imagine, can't you, people like, you know, talking to him and thinking, oh, how ingenious, how brave, and quite right, he was ingenious, he was brave, but it didn't start with him. It started with Maximilian, who gave him back his hope. And I think that's what we're called to do. We're called to give, you know, when we're outside abortion centres, we're often dealing with people who are really immersed in fear and have lost all sense of hope. We're called to give them back hope. We're sometimes talking to people who've been through abortion and, you know, and feel so guilty about it. We're there to offer them hope. You know, there's that saying, isn't there? He who holds the most hope holds the most influence. And I think as Christians, it's not just a vain hope of, you know, this is what I'd like to happen. Our hope is rooted in Jesus Christ. You know, that's a real solid foundation of hope, a hope that we can be sure will be realized as long as we do our part. So I think maybe just a real encouragement for people to do their part, you know, going outside their local abortion centres, praying if they can't physically, if they're housebound, there's always something that we can do, finding what that part is that we can do. You know, I know when I'm talking to groups of students, sometimes I say to them, if it became illegal tomorrow to be pro-life, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And I think that, you know, just like when I was in my teens, I would ask myself this question, you know, it can't just be a label or a tag to be pro-life. We must actually be living it out. What do I do that actually makes me pro-life other than what I think, you know? And we must be constantly looking for ways, looking for opportunities to live out our pro-life beliefs. And yeah, I think that's something that we all need to do.
Excellent. Your message on hope there is fantastic, and I hear the echoes of a famous British leader from the past, and I often am quoting him with a very bad imitation, but never, 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 never give up. The man, who led Britain through the darkest hour. It's like it's a war on death, but it's a war of life. It's a war to bring life. And this is, you know, again, pull back to the 10,000 foot level. What do you see? What do you see in all church history? We are marching for life. And you literally are in this cause, but this is the force of God. He brings life. He brings healing. He brings resurrection, and we are in desperate need of it. Isabel, how do people find you? If they want to join the ranks, how do they find you?
Well, I've got a website, March for Life, marchforlife.co.uk. I run the March for Life in England, so people could go onto that website and they'd be able to find an email address and phone numbers and things there to get in contact if they wanted to at all. marchforlife.co.uk.
And they could also show up at the Norton Clinic. They'll typically find you guys down there. Is that true?
Well, it'd be best to get in contact with me first, so that we can make arrangements. But yeah,
and get people's heads screwed on. Yeah. And just further urging you. I mean, you never need to say this because it's just the very fringe. But we never respond in violence. We never hurt. We love. We are the agents of God. We love. We're not doormats. but we are a force of love and goodness and power. So, and that's what wins the day. Look at Martin Luther King, look at Gandhi. Who did they learn from? They learned from Jesus. So anyways, so encouraged by you and your spirit and what you're doing, and even your civil disobedience, which is so small, and just praying silently and you're being nailed for it. It's like, you've got to be kidding. It's come to this. So praise God, you're doing that. I would tell others all the way, let's go. This is what it's going to take. This is for a revolution, not in the spirit of life, not politically. It's like, this is what it takes. Is there enough evidence to convict you? You said it already. So let the Spirit of God urge you on, people. And Isabel, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
All right. God bless.